Meanwhile, students are rebelling against colleges and universities nationwide demanding tuition refunds as classes move online. However, the Washington Post reports many of these schools are not backing down despite mounting lawsuits and legal challenges. Students argue they're not getting the full college experience tuition pays for, including seminars, labs, internships, and study abroad opportunities. Education reporter Nick Anderson wrote that article for the Washington Post, and he is with us now to talk more about this. So, Nick, this is really interesting. Why aren't colleges willing to offer at least partial tuition refunds?
Well, they have a lot of expenses right now. They have to pay their salaries of professors who are still working. They have to pay staff who are trying desperately to keep the colleges operating at a sort of different level, but still operating. And they also have expenses in trying to change the way they teach and deliver remote learning. So they argue that it's fair for students to continue to pay the normal tuition rate. What I found is that there are a number of students around the country at the University of California, at the University of Miami, at Johns Hopkins University, at the University of Chicago, who are saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe we should not have to pay quite as much because this isn't what we signed up for.
So what I found really interesting about your article, because as I started reading, I thought to myself, these schools have millions, in some cases billions of dollars in fundraising that they do. They have a pot of money. Why can't they help the students out a little? But they argue that, they can't just use that money for anything they want.
Okay, so that's a very good point. The schools often have endowments. Those endowments typically are restricted to specific purposes that donors gave the money for. So it's not like they're all just simply rainy day funds that are sitting around waiting to be dipped into. The endowments are meant to support specific activities at the university. However, it's also true that these universities do have fairly substantial resources in some cases, and they are providing financial aid and assistance, emergency assistance to students who need it. The question is, how much more assistance can universities give? And I think that they might find themselves in a lot of financial difficulty if they start issuing significant refunds and cutting tuition. So the universities are in a bit of a jam.
Nick, you mentioned in your article, you highlight a couple of students who are sort of going through this. In one case, Pavan Patel, who makes the point that he is missing out. Forget the college experience, but he's missing out on the immersive academic experience that goes with paying his tuition, which in his case at Johns Hopkins University is $27,000 plus per semester. So you talk about in your reporting that these students are taking their demands to court. I wonder what is the basis of the lawsuits, and if you're hearing from legal experts that these lawsuits actually have a chance of winning in favor of the students.
Well, I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for the lawsuits to be resolved anytime soon. But they are class action suits. We are finding them in certain parts of the country, and I haven't seen any evidence yet that those suits are proceeding, but we'll see. We'll track them. For Pavan Patel at Johns Hopkins, he made the point to me, hey, look, if I don't talk with my professors, meet my professors, and network with them, if I don't get the chance to work with my classmates in person, I'm learning a little bit less than I ordinarily would. Sure, I can do my homework and schoolwork remotely through the computer, just as you and I are talking right now through our computers, but it's not the same thing. When you go to a residential university or college, really the point of those schools is to immerse. It's to meet people. It's to be close together. And so this whole social distance thing, which is important for public health reasons, is very difficult for educational reasons. That's what the real issue is here. And it'll be interesting to see if in the fall, colleges and universities are able to reopen as normal, or if they have to continue this.
Yeah, I've mentioned this before to the viewers and to you, Vlad, that I live in an area where there are a lot of academics. It's very close to Penn's campus and Drexel's campus, and I think there are 5 professors on my street. And one in particular is a biology professor, and yeah, he switched to online learning, and he's working very hard to give, his students the best experience possible, but he can't replace labs. And he tried to do dissections via video, and it just wasn't working. He's also, several professors have told me that they've kind of been asked to switch to a pass-fail structure instead of actually grading things, which also makes you wonder whether or not, the students are getting the full experience. But you talked about moving forward to, the summer and the fall. Do these schools even know if they'll be able to open fully in the next 6 or 7 months?
It's a huge question. And actually, many parents and students right now are asking, when will campuses reopen? For new college students who are thinking about enrolling in the fall, they want to know, where should I go, and can I go in person? They're anxious to leave home and start their adult lives. So this is a very live question right now, and colleges don't have answers. They are saying essentially, give us time. Wait until mid-June, wait until July, we'll have answers for you. Right now, all we have are scenarios, and the scenarios are difficult. Some of those scenarios involve reopening with social distance measures, which are very difficult to imagine, as I said, in residential colleges. Other scenarios involve delayed openings or opening remotely. I want to say a word about the professors, the one that you mentioned. They are really acting heroically here. It is extraordinarily difficult in the middle of a semester to just pivot and leave the classroom and flip the switch and go online. And every college president that I've talked to says these faculty are really doing extraordinary things in trying to finish out and salvage the school year. So I salute those laboratory professors who are trying to make a go of it. It's hard. And you're right, the laboratories, when they're not accessible, it diminishes the educational experience profoundly. We will see in the fall whether this online education revolution can ramp up in a better way, in a more sophisticated way, if it's necessary. So that's one thing we're keeping an eye on.
Nick, I completely agree with you with regards to our educators, both at the college, the collegiate level, and high school and other schools, elementary schools. We've often talked about the saluting that we do to our essential workers and medical professionals, but you're right. Teachers are faced with a Herculean task of continuing to educate young minds and to nurture them to at least finish out the school year. And it is proving to be a monumental task. And I just want to ask you one last question before we wrap this up, because it's the point that you sort of made earlier, but I want to drill down just a little bit more. There are students who are suggesting that these universities should forgive tuition, but you made the point that that many of these student loans that students have received are still intact. In other words, kids are still getting their student loans because at one point in the article you mentioned the University of Chicago. They've got an $8.5 billion endowment, but as you pointed out, that endowment is earmarked for things including student loans that the students are still receiving.
Right. So, the issue here is the economy is in free fall. Families are suffering economically. A lot of people are jobless. Student savings accounts, education savings accounts are shrunken. The job market for students when they graduate looks horrific. So basically, students are looking for any relief they can. And a lot of colleges are very sympathetic to that. They want their students to succeed, and they do not want to lose their students and have them drop out. So they're bending over backwards trying to figure out, okay, what little pots of money can we tap to help a student with this part of their educational experience or that part of their educational experience without sacrificing the bottom line of charging tuition for credit toward a degree. So the colleges are effectively doing this dance where they want to aid the students through financial aid as much as possible, and University of Chicago is just one example, without diminishing their fiscal bottom line in a large way for coming classes.
Nick Anderson, thank you so much. I do want to point out that we are talking about tuition here, and many schools have partially refunded housing, meal plan, parking, stuff like that. But this is really about tuition. Nick Anderson, thank you so much. Great conversation.
Thank you. Stay safe.